we just witnessed one of the most interesting dynamics of draft that I've seen in a very long time in the LCK Challengers League. This is a game between T1's Academy team, which includes Rekkles, by the way, notable player, and as well as FearX. The main thing with this is that the LCK Challengers League is currently using the Fearless draft format, which is becoming more and more one of the most primary or the primary drafting format for most teams and most competitive formats for the foreseeable future. I wanted to use this video as an exploratory piece on why Fearless Draft can be so dynamic for both teams. So basically, there's a little bit of variance depending on the region and the league and how it's implemented, because people are still figuring out how they would like to envision Fearless Draft. But in the LCKCL, they basically just keep it pretty simple. So both champions that are picked from both sides in each game are basically removed from the entire pool for both teams, and bans do not remove champions from this pool. So if you ban a certain champion, they don't really count. And this creates a lot of different dynamics and team compositions and different drafting strategies, and even to the point of like you can sack certain games. Like you can have a suboptimal draft in some of your games just to be able to get a more optimal setup for your subsequent games. So this and then having specific champion sets be removed can set you up for future compositions and drafts there, and that's like something that I'm for certain isn't being explored enough in this case. And I think this game gives just a mild example of what basically happened. So this starts off in game 1, which is, I would say, the most normal draft, obviously, because no champions have been removed from the pool yet. So basically, for all intents and purposes, this is a normal draft from both sides, right? And in this case, we get to see what's established. So both teams, they ban out, let's say, a lot of good vacuum picks in this case. The only one that it's pretty interesting is the Ornn ban against T1 specifically. This is something that probably Dal specifically causes a lot of problems with, because it's a very common thing that's banned by Fox basically throughout this entire series. So nothing too special in this case. Very common Corki R1, sorry, Azure R1, R2 with the Lilia prior pick, and this basically sets up the AD carry flex for FearX, in which case they cash out, moving Ezreal to mid to match the Tristana. So in isolation, pretty good draft, but nothing really to write home about, nothing special, right? And that's the problem with the normal competitive format, because we basically get these drafts over and over, and we establish like some teams are just willing to ban the same 3 champs every single time, no matter what, and that kind of makes things boring in a sense as well. So we want to, get it a little interesting. And in this case, because of simply of the idea that FearX got a lot of priority picks, I consider ourselves to be more of a red side meta this patch. It's slightly FearX sort of favored, and lo and behold, there's such a small margin for T1 to really play, because their game is just contingent on their ability to snowball their lanes and really just take over the game. But that doesn't really happen in this case. And the Lilia scaling, the Zeri scaling, the Cassante scaling is just it gets out of control really quick. So in game 2, this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting, right? So the 10 champions that we just saw are now gone from the pool. And the reason this is interesting in this game is that there are some options that I mentioned, like letting champions go through in order to remove them from the rest of the in the rest of the pool. But in some cases, these teams are not even willing to give that up at all, right? Let's say, for example, FearX have been banning Ashe for basically the entirety of the series, and they're not even willing to let T1 play it, which is pretty funny. They're not even willing to, alternatively, you could let T1 play it one game and then just get rid of it, but that's not even what's happening. They just don't even want to deal with it at all. And another thing to keep in mind is that Zeri, Ezreal, and Tristana have all been removed from the pool. Therefore, Corki stonks have gone up very significantly in this second game, because he's the only remaining prominent mid laner that's really high priority for a lot of people, and it subsequently leads into a specific Corki ban for T1. The Jax ban is also something that's interesting, because it's not too common, and I wonder if this was something that's coming up given the situation, because if you think about it, Cassandra and Renekton, the two most blindable sort of top laners, were both removed in this case, and it forces more unique dynamics. This is only the first game, so it basically just makes both teams tap into the pool of like S tier and Z tier champions a little bit more, but nothing too crazy, right? LeBlanc is the example of this. So with all the very high priority, high push champions out of the way, LeBlanc kind of comes up in priority. And then with the AD carry pool being not the widest, as well as it being choked across 2 different roles, up to 3 depending on the top lane matchup, it gets very apparent very quickly that it gets to the weeds of like what champions are remaining and what we can even play anymore. So in this case, it's nothing too crazy in the fact that a lot of the weak side champions are removed, so T1 ended up playing Malphite, so that's something that we would see differently. Both top laners are weak side top laners, but there's only so many of them that are like really viable. And as the series really progresses, you can kind of see how this like sort of evolves and makes it more interesting, right? Even like things like Leona, I believe, was removed in the very first game, so it just makes for more interesting compositions and styles. And as you remove more and more champions from the pool, this stuff gets even crazier and crazier, because when you a lot of about what's good about draft is that things always have context, and when certain champions are just removed in general and certain things, this paves the way for other picks to kind of come up. And I think when you see 20 champions, let's call 20 of the most prominent champions in the game automatically gone, and then you're banning another 6 up to 10 more, then you're really digging deep into what you can play at this point, and it's really hard to keep track. Even as a viewer, you can see only this top bar interface here. You know, just so many junglers that are gone, right? We're down into the weeds of the Sejuani Maokai. There's not much, these teams are not willing to play all of the full clear stuff because a lot of the laners that would supplement the full clear champions are gone. A lot of the dominant laners. And you know, we've gone down to the point where Dal has to play things like Kennen. And it's very, very on the fly, very dynamic. And champion pools of players are getting choked really, really hard. Historically, pro players would only have to play like maybe just between 3 to 5 champions at most on a given patch, because of just the nature of bans and the static nature of not having a format like Fearless, right? Another example, by this point, a lot of the priority high pushing mids are taken, like I said, so with the exception of Corki in this case, so you have to drop down to like the front to back control mage type style. And as I mentioned, both players, you know, running out of champions to play in terms of the weak side matchups, the top lane is naturally going to get more dynamic, right? The most blindable top laners are getting removed, Renekton and Cassandra. There's things like Aatrox that's still available. You know, there's always going to be some champions that are available, but if you take out those champions by having like having them be opened in like the first game or something, and then having it be reset, and then this opens certain matchups for other game openers, and you can try different compositions. There's like so many different options that you can go for, and there's going to be new drafting strategies that revolve around, oh, if I remove this in game 1, then we can play it in games 2 and 3 potentially. Just has an option for us, so we can create new openers for us based on the openers that we do on previous games. And that's what makes this so wild, in my opinion, right? We're dropping down to like Zaya ADC coming back out, because I think we're missing like 8 AD carries at this point already, right? And the more you tap into a player's potential and their flexibility, I think a format like this really brings out what both the competitive format needs and also what the 2024 version of what a pro player should be able to do, right? A lot of the time, just executing the best comp and just doing it right every time, it's not the most exciting thing in the world, right? I would consider that like, that's what makes the league kind of stale sometimes, when you see the same patch and people are complaining about the same champions over and over. This is going to remove that, and I think this is going to make things much more interesting. And I'll show you another example. If we get to game 4, look at the bans. Every ban set is going to change every single game. In this case, look at the bot lane matchup. We're bringing back the Lucian Nami dynamics, and Caitlyn is coming out, seeing a debut here, because there's just so many champions that are gone that it's like, what's left? We have to really tap in, and we have to really think about, like, okay, if they go for a Lucian Nami threat, okay, we have to think about something that can actually pair with it. Varus is gone, you can't really go. Kai'Sa is gone, Tristan is gone. Like, there's so many champions that are just missing at this point, and you have to really dig deep into these champion pools, and that's what makes this so interesting. Like, now we're back to the front to back meta, right? Because all the forward options, or a lot of the poke priority options are gone. So the amount of poke that's available in the game is just reduced, and we're like shifting metas. And then also in this format of the CL format, or at least the Fearless Draft format, the draft does reset in Game 5. So all the bans are basically removed, and now players, it doesn't get too excessive in terms of, like, Guan and Diablo have to play like 80 carry Maokai or something crazy like that, right? Like, there is extremes to this, and we're still testing out what the format is, and I really like the concept overall. And I think in this game specifically, it just comes back to being able to adjust to what your plan was in Game 1, and then making the appropriate adjustments based on the playstyles that you've been seeing. And to be honest, that's kind of like a boring way to go about it, because it kind of like is a rehash of the previous format. I understand this is best for competitive integrity and giving the best game possible, but in terms of the spectator experience, I'm sure there's a way that we can come to a happy medium. We can remove we can have teams like remove some champions like from the ban pool and like bring them back, like 3 bans or something like that, or it could be a really interesting experiment here. And I think overall my point is, like, this should be a really good case that should be brought up to kind of provide context as to what the competitive format of drafting in League should look like in the future. So I think this is a great example of what the Fearless Draft format could produce, and it can produce some really awesome stuff. But I don't know, I'd like you guys' feedback. I think it's just super interesting, and I'd be open to some options on as to what this could eventually look like final form. So hopefully this gave some insight to you guys just as to how interesting the competitive format can be. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one, guys.